everybody, and welcome to e-commerce quick fix official podcast. Today we are with Jadah Westdorp, founder of 3PL, founder and CEO of 3PL. Jadah, how are you? How's everything?
I'm great. How are you?
We are really excited to have you with us today because we're going to be talking about a massive topic, an issue that it's of the utmost importance for companies here in the European Union, which is how to jump across the ocean, how to expand into the United States. But first of all, it is a good idea or it is a bad idea right now to jump into the United States.
I would say it's probably always a good idea if you're an e-commerce brand to try to at least start thinking about getting into the US market. I think we have a larger addressable market for e-commerce brands. There's definitely a lot more popularity in the US of customers buying things online versus in store. And a lot of the trends are kind of originating from the US. So if you are an e-commerce brand and you have the capability and the desire, I think it's always a good idea to consider jumping over to the US when possible.
At maturity level, we can claim that the United States is kind of a standard, isn't it? The global standard for what e-commerce should be right now.
Definitely. I think that has to do with a few factors, probably because, the larger tech hubs are in the US. So Google, Nvidia, Apple, all the giants, Shopify, well, they're Canadian technically, but I feel like a lot of the US brands are using them. So I think just having that kind of like tech centered hub in the US just kind of sets the standards globally for what's happening online. And then, like I said, the US customers are much more used to buying things online. That kind of like the trend of e-commerce and purchasing things and Amazon growing so rapidly really started in the US and then branched out globally. So I still think those same kind of trends are happening. Similar, I thought about like influencer marketing, even how like the marketing is picking up. These trends also originated in the United States. So with the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, now TikTok, and everything that's expanded, and how our consumers are being marketed to, and what types of products they're buying, largely influenced by these U.S. social medias or U.S. based social medias that are now global as well.
Before we delve deeper into breaking and entering into the U.S. market, could you please tell us a little bit about the history of 3PL so the people can actually understand why are we talking about this with you?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, let me give you some background on 3PL, what we do, and why I founded it. So I actually founded 3PL in 2023. So we're a relatively new startup. However, I have a personal background in e-commerce for over 10 years. I've worked on the brand side in brand operations, e-commerce management for Shopify, Magento stores, Amazon brands. I worked closely with an investor to create brands and expand the brands that he already had that were actually started in the EU, and I helped move it over to the US. So I've been in the brand's shoes and working with their logistical challenges as well. And then I also later in my career moved to SaaS, enterprise SaaS sales. So I worked with a lot of brands like on the software side. So again, I just kind of saw this niche, this need for brands to be able to connect with providers of all types, specifically in the logistics space. So when you look at the logistics space as a whole, it's quite antiquated. Everything we do runs off of logistics. The entire global market is really reliant on, all the things that we read about when there's like an issue with a canal or the containers being delayed, and the prices that are affecting the price of goods that we as a consumer at the end of the day have to pay more for whenever there's a spike in transportation costs, things like that. But that global logistics market has existed forever, like way pre-internet days. And I just think because of its size and its age, it never really caught up digitally. So now when you have these modern brands, like let's say in the e-commerce space, and they're looking for a logistics provider, they kind of have to now go back in time and navigate a very antiquated space. So I saw that there was a niche really in helping brands to connect with these providers. Specifically, 3PL, as the name indicates, focuses on 3PLs, so third-party logistics providers. Those kind of operational arms of a company that operate as the receiving, picking, packing, storage branch of the brand's operations and logistical operations for the brand. But we also can help with, locating a freight broker if you need, or a transportation provider, or a technology partner that helps in the post-purchase shipping space. So while 3PLs are the concentration of what we primarily matchmake brands with, we really try to just be a resource for brands across the entire, logistics industry and whatever that they need in those capacities. So I'm really proud of what 3PL is doing and accomplishing, and the brands that we've helped so far and are still working on helping. And we're also helping the 3PLs to kind of connect with more of their primary customer base, the brands that they're actually going to be able to help out the most, by really niching down and figuring out what those 3PLs, those providers are good at, and then which brands need exactly what requirements. And we're making sure that they find each other more easily, quickly. Things can move a lot faster when a lot of the preliminary legwork and verification process is done upfront, and that's what 3PL is here to do.
Creating the perfect match, isn't it?
Hopefully, and hopefully long term too, right? Everybody wants a long term partner, as we'll get into it, I'm sure. And as most brands are aware of, moving logistics providers and trying to find new ones is a really, it can be a precarious process, and nobody likes to do it. So hopefully you can find someone that you can work with long term, that can help your brand grow in the long term as well.
That being said, which one do you think is like the main first thing any European brand needs to do before entering into the United States market?
Well, I think as a brand, you have to figure out what your value proposition is. Just because you have an item that sells well in the US or the EU, excuse me, just because you have an item that sells well in the EU doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have the same viewpoint from an American market. So a US consumer has different needs, different tastes in style and in necessities, depending. And the US consumer is also very dynamic. So just because it's a US consumer, if they live in Florida versus living in, Oregon, they're going to have extremely different needs, and especially depending on your vertical. So I
So
would say as
it's
a
not like
brand,
it's not homogeneous. It's not like the entire country behaves the same, isn't it? It's not like that.
correct, correct. Yeah. And when you're entering the US market and you're doing it online, you're making your product available to the entire country. So you're trying to speak to everyone at the same time. It can be really difficult to understand all the differences between the needs and who you really need to target, and how to do so. Because just like the EU is diverse, with all of the different countries, the US, maybe we all speak the same language,
Yeah.
but that's about where the similarities usually end.
Yeah,
So
for
really
the
understanding.
Europeans, it's kind of we look at the United States and we feel like it's the same thing, because it's one single country. In the case of the European Union, obviously you have like all these different nations and nationalities and histories and backgrounds. But what you're telling me is that up to a point is the same situation in the United States. I mean, it's pretty different east from West Coast, New York from California. Is this correct?
Yeah, I would say so. Also, in the behaviors of the customers, what their own like viewpoints on certain maybe politics, religion, cultural beliefs can even vary within the U.S. So, how you're marketing to each group really might need to vary as well. This is, of course, very vertical dependent. Depends on what your item is. But in general, I think you do need to understand the differences, to be able to navigate those waters in the U.S.
And do you feel like that will be one of the main pitfalls or most common pitfalls for companies that are coming from the European Union to sell in the US?
Yeah, I think underestimating the size, the complexity, the demands, and the diversity that the US market has is probably a more common pitfall, that an EU brand would have coming over. That I've seen examples of, exactly kind of what we touched on. An EU brand coming over, they did really well in, whatever country it was in the EU, Germany, Austria, maybe even several countries there. Maybe they've expanded in the EU and feel like they can navigate different types of customer bases. But then coming to the US, they realize that there maybe is a lot more competition in the same space now, or that they didn't really think about their unique value proposition and how to create that desire for a US customer to want that specific thing from them, and then what that means for each type of US customer. So I think thinking about your product, your vertical, is it going to speak to a certain type of American customer? And then how are you going to target that specific type of customer is extremely important to understand before you try to move operations over here.
And the third party logistics part, how complex is that in the United States?
Yeah, of course. So securing a reliable logistics partner to handle your distribution, warehousing, delivery, exactly what 3PLs focus on, is extremely important, especially if you are EU based. Maybe you can make some site visits to the US, but unless you're planning on moving over to the US and sitting in or next to your warehouse, you're going to have to rely on this logistics partner to do a very important branch of your business, which is the operations of all your physical goods. So making sure that you find a 3PL that has extremely thorough communication and communicates in a style that fits you as a brand and you as a brand owner, operations manager. That is going to be extremely important because they are going to be your literal boots on the ground. They will be the ones receiving your items, inspecting them, communicating with you about any hiccups that are happening or just events that are going wrong, which inevitably it always will. It seems like a simple process, sending a container over, it just gets in storage, pick, packed, sent to the customer. But of course, this is life and things will always go wrong. So you're going to need a partner that knows exactly how to communicate with you and to understand your exact requirements. So being an EU-based company, even if English is a first, second, third, fourth, fifth language for you, making sure that your partner is going to be able to understand you even linguistically, as there may be some slight differences in the communication methods, and you may say one thing and they receive it as something else when they hear it, and then your orders or your inventory or your customer management doesn't get done appropriately to how you wanted it to do. So also making sure that they're constantly communicating with you about every little detail, I think is super important. These are things for you to look for in a 3PL when you are choosing them, and making sure that they can meet your needs. So if you have, let's say, for example, products that require kitting, or special types of, let's say, gift wrapping or influencer boxes that you want to be put together, and they have several steps that need to be done just for one order or one item to be taken care of, you need to make sure that your 3PL specializes in that. A lot of 3PLs can do the basics, but not all of them are specialty in certain areas. So that's another thing for you to really examine. What exactly do you need? And then what exactly does your 3PL focus on? Do they work with other brands that are similar to yours? What have those results look like? Speak to their customers, make sure they're happy, and ask if they've ever worked with an international brand before. Have they ever helped another international brand, an EU brand, to move to the US and help them grow in the US? Those are all things that I think are important for you to consider whenever you're thinking about a logistics partner.
Do you mind if we ask you for some success stories? Can you share some? Obviously, don't say the brand name. That's okay, but share a little bit of I don't know, like the background, the general story behind a successful implementation of a 3PL partner and a logistics operation in the United States, coming from outside. It doesn't need to be exactly from the European Union, but someone that is coming from outside the US.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen several brands that have had success in expanding to the US. They did kind of what I've touched on, which is they found a 3PL logistics partner who specializes slash has history in working with international brands that are now coming to the US.
That's kind of important, isn't it? Because they need to be used to working with international brands.
Exactly, and they need to understand the differences in those needs between a U.S. brand and a brand that's based elsewhere. Because also, when a brand is expanding to the U.S., it's kind of viewed as a startup, right? You have no sales, or maybe very, very few sales that you've been shipping from the other country, from the EU, Australia, Canada, wherever it was before. But now you're coming to the U.S. and you haven't really had full blown sales here yet. So now you're a startup. In addition to having the differences in culture and maybe thinking and communication, now you also have the challenge of starting all over again. And the 3PL has to be patient enough and understanding enough to view you as a startup with potentially very quick growth needs. So again, having someone in your pocket that has dealt with those types of logistical setups is really going to benefit you. And so we've seen some brands that have done that. They've found a solid 3PL that has done this multiple times. They understand the differences and have brokers and other like import partners that can also help them. So it's kind of all in one. You get all of your needs met in one. They'll help you with imports, taxing, requirements for the U.S. policies. That would be like the broker's job, the consultant's job, and then that 3PL works in conjunction with that in receiving, communicating, and setup for the brand. And with that, we've seen quite a few really successful launches of EU and other brands that have expanded to the U.S.
You were talking about the different cultural differences, culturally speaking, about different regions inside the United States. But are those differences also translated to the logistics? I mean, it's logistics operation fundamentally different, for example, in the East Coast than in the West Coast, or we can say that it's kind of the standard, same kind of level of quality and maturity all across the United States.
I think that has less to do with maybe the location of the, let's say, DC or warehouse. East Coast, West Coast operations, they mostly work with the same major carriers, the same brokers, the same types of transportation partners, and same like postal systems, right? But of course, cultural differences can come into play too. Like, for example, how the warehouse operates. Are they operating 5 days a week, or are they operating 7 days a week? It may not have necessarily to do with the location, but it could have something to do with that. It might just individually be from provider to provider. Also, with the communication, I think it's, again, important to look at how they're communicating with you. Is it just via email? Is it trying to pick up the phone and talk to you, which if you're outside the country could be a real challenge? Do they have softwares like Slack or other types of like direct messaging software setups where they can communicate with you that way? Are there project boards and Asanas and base camps and those types of tech pieces to help you keep track of everything? Or is it going to be more old school? And I think that has to do with not only location, but also maybe the age of the 3PL and the
Old
age
school,
of the
you mean by
operators.
phone? Old school. When
Yeah.
you say old school, you mean by phone, fax machine, and that's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen a fax machine in a while, but
You know
somehow it
what?
wouldn't surprise me if someone out there is still trying to
Well,
use one.
actually, we had a guest a few podcasts ago that we were talking about after podcast. We were talking about the realities in the level of maturity in Germany, and it surprised me that B2B in Germany is still done by a fax machine in some parts. So it was like, wow, we just took a time trip. We went back in time into it. I guess the United
Yeah.
States is fairly different in that because American people is kind of a fanatic of adopting new technologies pretty fast, and they have always been like very innovative in that regard. But do you feel like there is something that EU companies should be aware regarding the maturity level of the e-commerce infrastructure and the ecosystem of e-commerce in the United States, that they should be aware that it's fundamentally different at a technological level from Europe? Is there any technological gap to be highlighted here?
Yeah, I think again that can really vary on the vertical and kind of even the sales channels that you're using, right? Like if you're using Shopify or some global brand, it's probably pretty similar. It's the same software. But when you're looking at marketplaces, like for example, I know like Mexico and some of the EU countries, they have their own digital
Yeah.
marketplaces that don't exist in the US. And likewise, the US has a lot more focus on specific marketplaces that don't really exist too much outside of the US. So just getting used to the marketplaces, I think, and where else you could be getting sales from as an international brand coming over to the US, understanding like where do US shoppers actually shop online the most? And then are we aware of what those stores are, how they operate? what being a third party seller looks like to get listed with them. Or as you mentioned, B2B, right? Like I think most of this conversation I've been speaking more to D2C, but we work with B2B brands as well. And those retailers that the B2B brands are working with, the larger retailers like Nordstrom, Macy's, Best Buy, Costco, like all of these brands that are primarily US focused have extremely detailed setups on how these B2B orders have to be fulfilled. So if you are a foreign brand coming over to the US and you've never worked with these retailers before, and you also choose a logistics provider who is not familiar with them, I do think that would give you a lot of headaches in the long run. Some of them have dozens and dozens of pages of requirements on just how to send in one B2B order to them. So if you're working with a 3PL or a logistics provider who's never worked with that company before, and they're testing it out with you, who's also testing it out, this is going to be a problem.
Yeah, it's
And
going
so
to be
this is
too
something.
much testing, isn't it?
Yes, and it can be costly, not only time wise because like it's just going to cause delays, but they will start charging you fees for not putting the sticker on the right place of the outside of the box, and having it 2 inches above the bottom on the right hand corner so they can scan it in faster when they receive it. So it's those little detailed setups that I don't say that to scare anyone, but just to think about these things ahead of time, because you don't want to lose money immediately just by preventable things that you could have thought about by picking the right partner to begin with.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. Now, Jada, now we're talking about time wise. Which one? I know each case is going to be different, and this has to be done on a case by case basis. But if you have to say like a reasonable amount of time for a company to do that process of jumping into the U.S. market from the European Union, how much would that be? Like 6 months, 3 months? How much is kind of the normal amount of time that you need to set up your logistics operation in the U.S.?
Again, this is super dependent, so it's hard to put a generic number on it. I will say the majority of brands that I am working with and have worked with that are moving over to the US, it's taking them a lot longer than they initially anticipated. So, in their mind, I think they had 3 to 6 months, and these timelines are continuously pushed back. It's taking longer, like it's 9 months to a year. I think that has to do a lot with the regulations, making sure you have the tax compliance, understanding what tax nexus is in the US, for example, like every single state that you sell into, you might have to pay taxes on that separately. And that's 50 new tax laws that you somehow have to become familiar with. And of course, there are companies that can help you with that and softwares and things like that. But that's just one piece to consider. And then, yes, going through finding a broker that can help you, finding a logistics provider like a 3PL that you have time to interview, understanding like how long their setups take, how many SKUs do you have, like how many containers are you going to be sending, how much space do you need, do you need a trial run before you just send everything over? These are all things to take into consideration. So it's really hard to put a timeline on that. I would say anything less than 6 months would be extremely quick. It's not probably impossible, but it would be very quick. 6 months and up, I think. But by the time you start doing the research and reaching out and getting your ducks in a row, it's a normal expected timeline.
It's the legal part is extremely complex, isn't it? Because you have like the federal laws, and then you have a state law level. Would you give any advice to companies in the UA to deal with this? I mean, should they try, first of all, should they try to do it by themselves, or should they go for an expert?
I think an expert is 1,000% the way to go here. It is
There's
not
no
what
other option.
3PL special. No, and please don't try to do it on your own. You don't want to be like getting in trouble with some U.S. government laws that you're not even aware of. So yes, please find an expert. 3PL can help you connect with a consultant of some sort if you'd like, somebody that specializes in helping brands to move over. It's not what we specialize in, but of course we have partners that we know are reliable and we've worked with in the past that can really help you to do that. So that is definitely the way to go. Get somebody to hold your hand and at least provide some guidance. Even if you want to do a lot of the legwork yourself, it's good to have a guide when you're going to a dark, long tunnel with a light at the end.
That's the best accurate description of taxes in the world that anybody has ever
Yes.
given me. A long dark tunnel. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Now, Jada, from a customer perspective, do you feel like the American customer, the American consumer, has different expectations than the European one, time wise, for example, for deliveries? I mean, it's more like the Americans are more used to get 24-hour immediate delivery, or is this a wrong perception that we have here in Europe?
No, that's a correct perception. I would say the American consumer is extremely spoiled when it comes to delivery times, and even American-based companies are aware of that, and it becomes a problem. Everybody wants to mimic the Amazon model, which used to be 2-day shipping, but now it's same-day shipping or next-day shipping, which is even impatient for an impatient customer. So yes, being able to meet those timelines is kind of expected. That's not to say you can't get away with slower delivery times. Of course you can. And there are ways to incentivize that, doing the free shipping model with a minimum order value. And the American consumer is not so jaded that they will only shop with 2-day shipping. I mean, look at the launch and rise of brands like Shein and Temu that are literally coming from China. And, those take a week or two sometimes. And I think a customer is used to that, but that's the trade off for a cheaper product. So if you are coming, again, just think about your value proposition and then where you need to fit in the shipping times within that value prop. If it's a very important item to get like right away, if it's a competitive item to get right away, if it's a perishable good, if it's something, CPG, maybe food space where they're going to expect it very quickly, then you will have to consider what the cost of the shorter shipping times is going to be and the trade-off for that. Um, I think Amazon has obviously set an incredible precedent for all e-commerce brands, especially in the US. As I said, the 2-day, same day, next day shipping. And I know that that's not really the case yet in the EU across the entire kind of continent, even though EU includes more. But I know that it's not in every country in Europe that Amazon has the same level of shipping, or that
No, I
even they
mean,
have the same level of
generally
availability.
speaking, here in Europe for the major cities, you will find the same standard, I guess, than the United States. Perhaps not same day delivery. I mean, I haven't seen that yet, but 24 hours delivery, yeah, it's kind of a standard in Madrid, London, Paris, Brussels, whatever. I mean, it's kind of standard in the major cities, in Berlin also. But you will not find the immediate like flash deliveries that you see in the United States. That thing is not happening here yet so far. And one other thing that I was going to ask you about, because we get a lot of our audience asking this constantly, is that those the American consumer, it's fundamentally more concerned about free returns, or it doesn't care so much about that? Because here's kind of a deal. I mean, if you buy a product and you get a possibility of a free return, that gives confidence and people are more inclined to buy that product. But if you go to a brand and you buy the product and then you have to pay for the return if something goes wrong, it's kind of a deterrent. It's like, I will not buy this one, I will find another one. It's the same thing in the United States, or is it different there?
Yeah, so that's great. That's a great question. I actually used to work for a software company that specialized in returns and return automation, and they've done many, many studies about this. And of course, the consumer market is always changing. So every year there's updated information. I think generally customers like free returns, but it's not a make or break deal. I
Okay.
think what is more important for American consumers is to understand the return policy and have an easy return policy. So it's not so much that they don't want to spend the extra $5 or $10 to make the return back. It's how hard is it going to be for me to get these returns back to you? Can I go to a quick portal on your website and do a couple of clicks and get a label? Or are you telling me that it's going to be near impossible? I have to find an in store location. I have to go print my own label or take it to the post office. In those cases, that's really a deterrent for the initial purchase even happening. Of course, free returns are great. And I think that that's optimal if you have the ability to offer that. But I think that the American consumer is also understanding how much we're returning, which is a lot. We do a lot of ordering several sizes, ordering several colors, several options, large initial purchase orders, try on, send back. And so I think a typical American consumer understands that that costs the brand money for the shipping label, for the labor, etc. So they're not necessarily not going to make the initial purchase if they have to pay a little bit to send some of that back for the convenience of being able to try on and do everything at home. But they do want to know that returns are possible. You have a decent return policy with a decent return window, and that it's easy to initiate those returns and get them back to you. Perhaps even scheduling like a return pickup. So making that easy for the customer, I think, is the biggest differentiator.
Now that you mentioned the try on different sizes, different colors and stuff, I mean, fashion is perhaps one of the largest sectors. One of the largest e-commerce or well, retail in general sectors all over the world. Would you say we know the United States market is huge? It has a lot of people and a lot of purchasing power. But would you say that it's a good idea to try to sell in fashion in the United States right now, or the sector has become too competitive? And that being said, which ones would you say like these are not good sectors right now to try to break into the United States due to perhaps competition?
Yeah, I would say go back to the value prop. If you are going to be in the fashion or apparel space and you want to be in the US, what is going to differentiate you from all of your competitors who are essentially selling the same or similar items? Is there a specific style that you're offering, a specific price point? A marketing campaign, it could be as simple as just marketing it a different way, right? Like that's mostly what a brand is compromised of is the brand image and the marketing behind it. So if you have all of those aligned, then of course there's always space for new brands. New brands are constantly popping up in the US and becoming overnight sensations due to like social media and influencer marketing and how it's presented to the US market. However, it is extremely competitive, and these fast fashion brands that are offering extremely low price points and relatively decent shipping timelines, they are really becoming the focus of the American consumer as well. So just consider what it is exactly that you as a brand are offering, how you want to present it to the American consumer, and what you're focusing on. There's always room for more, but I do think you need to come like prepared with all of those things in mind, and maybe just start with a lower SKU count. Like apparel and fashion in general, it tends to have very high SKU counts because of the sizing and colors. So that's like a high risk to have all of those inventory items on hand. Maybe start with like your best sellers in whatever country you're coming from. Test those out first before you start bringing your entire product line over and you have thousands of SKUs that are sitting in a warehouse not moving. So yes, definitely keep those in mind.
Now, if you have to give like three advices, the three key advices for a brand in the European Union to be successful in their transition into the US market, which ones will those be?
Three. Okay, let's see.
Well, let's say three, but if you want to give more, of course, you're more than welcome.
Well, let me see what comes to my mind. One, I think we've talked about extensively is finding a really solid logistics partner. Again, your boots on the ground, your fly on the wall, your partner. They're going to be hand in hand to helping to expand your brand. So you need to have a strong logistics partner that can understand all of your requirements, meet those requirements, and successfully and thoroughly communicate with you on the other side of the world. That is going to make or break your business model. If they're shipping out items late or incorrectly, the few customers that you do start to gather are quickly going to churn and they're not going to rebuy, and it's just going to ruin your brand image immediately. So definitely have a strong logistics partner. Have a marketing, this would be a separate one, have a marketing and value proposition firmly in place, whether that also includes finding a marketing partner in the US who is used to marketing to a US consumer, finding a marketing agency or consultant who can guide you and navigate you through the differences of the American consumers. That is going to also make a huge world of difference. You'll be able to get launched a lot quicker because you'll be able to understand those differences and speak to them right away as soon as you start to launch your brand in the US. And then let's see, the third, I would say, consider your vertical, consider your competition in the US. Do a lot of market research before copying and pasting what you have in the EU or another country over to the US. We've talked extensively about how there are differences in creating brands in the different areas. So make sure you have done your thorough research on why you want to move your brand to the US. Is it just because there are more customers here and you think, well, we can do it again, we've already done it once, which is totally possible, and I want you to do that. But make sure you understand like what you are going to bring to the American market that is different than what they already have access to, and how you're going to execute on that.
I think we already asked you this, or you already kind of answered this, but we want to wrap it up with this final question. When is the best time to jump into the US market?
As soon as you have done all the work and as soon as possible. So, as soon as you feel like you have a solid reason to, and then you have all of your ducks in a row, your marketing, your logistics, which 3PL can help with, your business plan, and the motivation behind why you want to move over. As soon as you have that in mind, do it. Try it. The American market is great for e-commerce. It's great for online sales. It's great for expanding your brand and furthering your business to even more, people who are willing to buy and find something new. So do it quickly, but do it correctly and do it with quality.